I refer you to my earlier answer about balance. Unfortunately, because of our rather exposed position post-Brexit, we do have to be outwardly looking in our economy. If we want our residents and our constituents to get away from food banks, we need to have more import-export with the UK, and we need to be very pragmatic on the question of having an economic relationship with the fourth biggest trading partner that we have.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he, looks like it'll be the Minister, will make a statement on the Hong Kong police offering rewards for the arrest of pro-democracy campaigners, including BNOs resident in the United Kingdom.
Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for Witham for her question on this most important matter. And I'm glad to reassure her that the Foreign Secretary did indeed issue a statement on Christmas Eve, immediately following the Hong Kong police's issuing of arrest warrants for these 6 pro-democracy campaigners. As the Foreign Secretary said, those targeted on Christmas Eve were merely exercising their right to freedom of expression, and we will not tolerate any attempts by foreign governments to coerce, intimidate, harass or harm their critics overseas, especially here in the UK. We call on Beijing to repeal the national security law, including its extraterritorial reach, and we call on the Hong Kong authorities to end their targeting of individuals in the UK and elsewhere for seeking to exercise their basic rights. And let me reassure the Right Honourable Member that senior British diplomats immediately went out to reiterate the Foreign Secretary's deep concerns directly in Hong Kong and Beijing over the Christmas period, and officials here in London immediately raised concerns with the Chinese Embassy and Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office here in London. China's imposition of the national security law has clearly eroded the rights and freedoms of Hong Kongers. I raised these concerns with the authorities during my visit to Hong Kong, as did the Foreign Secretary during his visit to Beijing. But following the latest arrest warrants issued by Hong Kong police, ensuring the continued safety of the pro-democracy campaigners remains a top priority for the government. And, honourable members, let me assure you that the UK will always stand up for the people of Hong Kong, and the government's deeply committed to supporting all members of the Hong Kong community who have relocated to the UK and making such valuable contributions to life here in our regions.
Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank Mr Speaker for granting this urgent question. This is an incredibly serious matter, and as the Minister knows and the House knows, on Christmas Eve we saw the Hong Kong police once again trying to give the national security law extraterritorial reach and threatening people on British soil. We unequivocally reject any attempt to apply this law in the UK, and in government the Conservative Party were consistent and clear that the national security law should be repealed. Today I do want to press the government on how they're going to respond to this latest attempt to clamp down on freedoms and dismantle the essence of what made Hong Kong such a special and successful place. So can the Minister explain what practical steps are being taken across the government to protect those in the UK, now with bounties placed on their heads, and assess the security of the Hong Kong community in the UK, those who have come to the UK under the BNO route established by the last government when I was Home Secretary to be able to live in the UK, free from fear of intimidation. We must have a zero-tolerance approach to such behaviours. Has the Foreign Secretary raised this outrageous attempt to suffocate fundamental freedoms with his counterpart, Wang Yi? And doesn't this once again show this government's supposed reset with China is just one way? Before meeting President Xi, the Prime Minister had said he wanted a relationship that is consistent, durable and respectful, and stated that the pair agreed that there'd be no more surprises. Does the Minister believe that trying to arrest BNOs in the UK is compatible with any of these comments? And did the Hong Kong or Chinese authorities notify ministers in advance, or was this a surprise? Can the Minister confirm with a simple yes or no whether the Chancellor is going to be raising these bounties at the highest level when she jets off to China next week to beg for a quick investment for the bailout of her failing economic strategy? She cannot ignore the human rights issues on her visits, whether it be Hong Kong or Xinjiang. And will the government be taking this incident into account when considering the planning application for the new Chinese super embassy in London?
I thank the member for Witham for raising a number of concerns, and we are at one on the outrageous attempts to reach across the waters to try and impose any intimidation on people based here in the UK. She mentions other human rights concerns like the Xinjiang, and she is quite right to say that the long-standing policy of, for example, National Health Service not purchasing cotton equipment from the Xinjiang is the right policy, which of course was brought in from pressure from her own members over the last parliaments. And she's quite right also to emphasise the importance that she actually put in as Home Secretary around that time of the Welcome Programme to B&O passport holders, so that we could have an enormous contrast between a repressive regime or one that welcomes people who are newly arrived in the UK. And indeed, it's in our regions where we see those 12 hubs, which were created under her leadership, go from strength to strength, to give people the confidence who are based here in the UK to raise their voice, to become active in their local communities, to get their English classes and all the rest. She mentions the Chancellor's trip, and I knew that this would be one of her themes, so I've come prepared. And as she's well aware, we're in a position where our economy is quite fragile. And whilst we have very clear national security concerns, and today's a really good example of those, we do have to balance those with being an outwardly facing and globally trading nation where we need to sometimes be involved with other countries where their values may not completely align with ours. And so I make no apologies for trying to support British business abroad, including in Hong Kong, where British businesses have said it is so lovely to see MPs visit us. So I was able not only to be robust in my condemnation of these sorts of actions, but to support British business, to support our friends who are based in difficult places, who are undertaking hardship postings, and to support our diplomatic staff who carry out our values day by day to uphold the strong framework of human rights abroad.
John MacDonald.
Could I use this opportunity to ask the Minister, can she and possibly the Chancellor on the visit next week to raise the case of my Unite colleague Cal Ung, who became the General Secretary of the Confederation of Free Trade Unions in Hong Kong, became involved in the democracy movement, has been imprisoned, I believe it's now for 4 years. And on the last statement that was made, I was appealing to ensure that she had family access. So I wonder if her case could be raised again to secure her release, but at least secure her the opportunity of meeting her family.
Of course I will, and if my honourable friend would write to me just with the exact detail and his most recent update. I have had the privilege, Madam Deputy Speaker, of meeting with trade union colleagues from Hong Kong, from Taiwan and from a number of areas which are very exposed to the People's Republic of China and some of the tactics which we see. And I've been very pleased with how there's been a great collaboration across the trade union movement here in the UK, and not just that, but human rights defenders, be they environmental, be it freedom of religion or belief, or be it across the great range of freedoms which we enjoy here and which we want other countries to share as well.
Lib Dem spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The extraterritorial arrest warrants issued against Hong Kong pro-democracy activists are disgraceful. We must be clear. Hong Kong democracy campaigners like Carmen Lau, a former district councillor in Hong Kong, are welcome and free to express their views here in the UK. This attempt by Beijing to interfere in our democracy is unacceptable. The previous government did not do enough to counter this interference, and we urge this government to go further than words with actions. So will the Minister meet with me, my honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, and his constituent, Carmen Lau, to assure her of the government's support? Will the government make clear that it is illegal to bounty hunt in the UK and that anyone who does so can expect to be prosecuted? Will she use our Magnitsky sanctions regime against those in Hong Kong and Beijing responsible for the unacceptable targeting of Hong Kong pro-democracy activists? And in light of the continued detention of Jimmy Lai and these warrants, Will the government reconsider the Chancellor's planned trip to Beijing?
On the question of Miss Lau, I would be delighted to meet her again. I believe I have met her at an event with Dame Helena Kennedy in previous Parliament, but it would be lovely to refresh and also to hear from her following this traumatic experience that she's had. I'd also be very happy to provide an update in writing, but also here, as much as Madam Deputy Speaker will let me get away with Mr Lai, whose son Sebastian. I have personally promised that whenever I have the opportunity, I will raise the case of his father, who remains on trial, in fact, 6th day, and I have as many briefings as possible from the Consul General in Hong Kong and his team, who are very conscientious and diligent in attending all of those trials where they can get tickets for that and give me an update on a regular basis. And I have promised the Lai family that I will continue to do that, and I believe I have a meeting with them in the diary in the coming weeks, and I will do that. On the Chancellor's visit, I refer you to my earlier answer about balance. Unfortunately, because of our rather exposed position post-Brexit, we do have to be outwardly looking in our economy. If we want our residents and our constituents to get away from food banks, we need to have more import-export with the UK, and we need to be very pragmatic on the question of having an economic relationship with the fourth biggest trading partner that we have. And it's hard to tell that because I want to just talk about the other element of the relationship, but I know when I go to my constituency and people tell me how hard their lives are and how over the last 14 years our economy has gone into a decline, I have to stand up for our economic relationships as well.
Dougal.
By the way, about HSBC, which was outrageous. The Confucius Institute continues spying on Chinese students in universities. There are illegal Chinese police stations bullying the families back in China of those who have fled for human rights issues. Brutal assault in Manchester by the Consul General himself and by others. And I say to the Honourable Lady who speaks for the government, I was at odds with the Foreign Secretary in the last government when he went to do exactly as she says, engage with the Chinese. It was after that that they continued the case against Jimmy Lai. The problem is America has sanctioned a large number of Chinese officials at the highest level in Hong Kong. No British government has so far sanctioned a single person for any of the abuses that take place. Can I ask her, will she now say to the Foreign Secretary and to the Prime Minister, we must sanction people for what they do to abuse British citizens and those we welcome here, and until we do that, we will not be taken seriously.
I fully accept that as a sanctioned MP himself, he's very concerned. And I respect and admire his doggedness on raising these issues in the House. And I hope that he will reply to my kind invitation to come and visit me in the Foreign Office from myself and the Foreign Secretary to discuss his ongoing concerns, including what he's raised today. And specifically on the Mandatory Provident Fund, this is an ongoing dialogue, and both my predecessor, the former member for Berwick-upon-Tweed, and myself have raised the documentary requirements for withdrawing funds early, from which is basically the Hong Kong authorities have a particular approach. But we're quite right to keep campaigning on this. Why should B&O passports not receive their funds to which they're entitled? And we will continue. He mentions HSBC. We will continue with any financial institution which is not being fair to its own investors. And we will continue with his support to campaign for that. And on the other question of sanctions, he's well aware that there's many sanctions against Chinese entities. And I will write to him with the detail of where we're at with sanctions, but he is also aware of the long-standing government position on sanctions, that we don't talk about them in the House, because otherwise that could take away from their efficacy in future times.
Neil Coyle.
Speaker. What representations have been made to the Chinese Communist Party's ambassador here in London of the consequences of this, the third round of bounties targeting democracy activists, including British nationals and British national overseas here on British shores?
Is this, and he will be aware that from the statement of the Foreign Secretary that this issue is being taken extremely seriously, and we have raised through officials, because this happened only on Christmas Eve, this concerning transnational repression example, but that this is an ongoing discussion. We have got this high-profile visit next week. We've got our officials in regular contact with Chinese officials at the who have their embassy here in the UK, and indeed in Hong Kong, where our excellent Consul General meets regularly, not just with the Hong Kong ministers, but also with the Beijing official office in Hong Kong, to put on record our concern, our anger, and our ongoing human rights concerns, wherever they may come from.
Sir Julian Lewis.
No one should be surprised, as I've said before, when a communist totalitarian state behaves like a communist totalitarian state. But does she agree with me that there's a little pattern emerging here, that every time a senior British politician, be it the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, is going on a visit to the Chinese, something particularly egregious is done? This suggests to me that they're trying to rub our noses in it, and that they're not interested or concerned about anything which we say on human rights abuses.
Well, he's obviously can read his coffee cup granules better than I can, or his tea leaves better than I can. I don't know, but I am concerned at the increasing regularity of these sorts of issues, and I share his view that we need to understand more, and that we need to be as robust as we possibly can with the representatives here in London, and also through our excellent diplomatic representation abroad, but also to join together with like-minded, and I know that this is one of his areas that he's worked on through Congress and other members. But I do note that in the case of the US, who are always very robust on their response, that their export-import trade flows have increased rather than decreased.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's statement and her robust words, and with this outstanding disagreement when it comes to China's approach with UK people on our soil and protecting them, particularly those that have got bounties on their heads or have been subjected to China's national security laws, and particularly the words around HSBC's disgraceful behaviour in withholding pensions from people that have saved all of their lives to work for. But I just want to ask what we can do to protect people here on UK soil further. What discussions has the Minister had with her counterparts in the Home Office to ensure that UK police forces are fully understanding of the seriousness of the threats to Hong Kongers' safety on UK soil? And how can we be assured that UK police forces are being trained adequately to understand this pressure from China?
I thank her for her thoughtful comments, and I thank her for her support, cross-party support for the campaign for financial freedoms for B&O passport holders here in the UK. And I would like to pick her up on her point of training. And I think transnational repression, whether it is from the People's Republic of China, whether it's from Iran or other countries where we have such significant values disparities, I think it's very important that we continue to deepen our understanding and to improve our training on how particularly cybercrime works, how we could all be influenced by social media. And one area that I'm sure she will agree with is also in our learning institutes, whether they're universities where students have reported feelings of being watched or under surveillance. And all these things we are wise to, and between the Minister for Security, the member for Sheffield, Dan Jarvis, and we are working together very closely on the challenge of transnational repression and how much more difficult it is in this day of social media. But we will continue to redouble our efforts to train law enforcement officers, local government, teachers, so that we can pick up on any fears that those transnational victims of transnational repression might be experiencing.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Speaker, the UK-China relationship, I agree with the Minister, is necessary, but she'll know it's complicated and often conflicted. But we've had Russia attack political dissidents and refugees in this country, even to the point of murder. We have Iran seeking to track down political dissidents in this country, and now China, the Chinese state, let's be honest about it, making direct threats against people living in this country who have sought political asylum. So I have a simple question for the Minister, or two questions for me. One, are the security services resourced enough to counter this increased threat? And secondly, are Hong Kongers, political dissidents, safe on the streets of Britain?
Two excellent questions. The first one is, of course, about the training and capabilities. And this is part of actually our review or our audit of government departments and their preparedness and their how ready they are for these sorts of increasingly different challenges and threats. That's part of what we are looking at. And the second thing to say is that B&O passport holders are safe because we keep them safe and we ensure that there is the adequate training, that there is the adequate up-to-date knowledge on an ongoing basis. And I think we have the best intelligence services going, particularly on these sorts of questions. But we can never be complacent. And it's instances like this, raised by the member for Witham and others, where we have an opportunity to underline from Parliament the important and cross-party nature of cracking down on transnational repression.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Leeds resident Chloe Chung has been subject to a £100,000 bounty just for simply telling the truth about Jimmy Lai. At 19 years old, she is the youngest person to be subject to Hong Kong's national security law. What reassurances can the Minister give Chloe and other Hong Kongers that they will be protected from transnational repression while they reside within our borders?
Could I thank my honourable friend for his excellent constituency work, to know his constituents so well after only being elected for such a short period. And could I reassure him that if he feels that the advice that she has been given is in any way lacking, that he write to me so that I can have a specially designed package of safety for that vulnerable 19-year-old.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, and thank the Minister for her answers. Can the Minister outline just how far government is prepared to go before the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland decides to push back in relation to this issue? I have, in my constituency and across Northern Ireland, many reports of targeting of families and friends of mine by Chinese authorities. They feel vulnerable in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland are now on the front line. Government must step up and protect our citizens.
I thank the honourable member for that and for his relentless raising of human rights in the House and the concerns that his constituents have. And could I refer them to the excellent Welcome programme, which is run through local authorities, brought in by the last government actually, and continued by this one, to assist, to give a warm welcome, to look at issues like employability, some of the softer skills, English language courses, etc., but also that has the hard edge to it of being linked in with community policing, so that we can be absolutely sure that there is nobody here in the UK who is afraid for their safety due to a government many miles away intimidating them.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Minister today for coming to give reassurance. Many thousands of people from Hong Kong have decided to settle in Milton Keynes, and we're very pleased for it, and they are adding to our wonderful diversity. They are quite concerned and contacted me over Christmas, not just for themselves who live here, but also for their families that remain in Hong Kong, who are fervent believers in democracy, fervent believers in their nation of Hong Kong, and want to make sure that that is protected and their ability to campaign for it. The rise of transnational aggression continues, and also over Christmas, one of my constituents, Hazard Nelly, who is a whistleblower, was issued with an arrest warrant from Vietnam, and will she meet with me to talk about how we deal with this issue that is happening more and more across this country, across this world.
Could I thank her for once again being such an involved constituency MP to be so responsive over the Christmas period. We have a number of very active MPs here behind me, but also on a more serious point to say that these are the sorts of constituency concerns which we want to jump to immediately. So in the first case, could she approach her constituent and check that she has got the, that there's the safety package required, that the police are aware in that wonderful city of Milton Keynes? And also, could she let me know on the other case from the region, and I would be very happy to look at that if she could provide me with some details so that I can write back to her with an informed answer.
Olney.
I am fortunate enough to have a large community of Hong Kongers in my constituency of Richmond Park. They're extremely welcome. They speak to me often about the limitations imposed on them by the conditions of the BNO visa under which they have arrived in this country. They are unable to fully access healthcare, education, employment opportunities. Would the Minister agree with me that to address some of these concerns that Hong Kongers here in Britain have would send a very strong message to the Chinese government about how much we value our Hong Kong citizens in this country and how much this government works to support their freedoms and their right to live in this country?
I thank the honourable member, and they have the pleasure of walking in Richmond Park, which is a lovely thing to do, but also for her concern for her constituents. And the scheme was designed by the previous government. There's 224,000 BNO passport holders now in the UK. And on the whole, I think it's a success story in terms of the 12 hubs and the welcome programme, the English courses, and so on. But there are always improvements that could be made. So I wonder if she would direct that to my colleagues in the Home Office in the first instance, but copy me in, because I'm keen to know how we can be even more welcoming so that we can provide the contrast between a society that values difference, that values newcomers and what they bring, but that also makes everybody feel safe.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The British Hong Kong community, including those who have made their homes in my constituency of Bracknell, will welcome the Minister's robust answers today. Will she confirm if Beijing's actions against BNOs will be looked at and scrutinised as part of the government's China audit?
Yes, of course. And could I encourage him, if he has anything specific that he would like officials to look at in the, because it's quite a broad audit, that he could just write to me just a couple of paragraphs so that I can wind that into our response, because what we want to do is have an up-to-date audit, and we're hoping, if he could do that soonish, we're hoping to come out with that in the coming months. Because what we want to do is we want to be robust on human rights, we want to be robust on security, and we are concerned about cyber security and other levels, the transnational repression which appears to be growing. But we also have an edge to it, which is looking at our own national interest, where we are exposed economically. And this is the difficult thing that we have to do in foreign policy, is to look at our own interests as well as defending our broader human value and human rights.
Stephen Gethings.
Speaker,
The Minister was right earlier on when she highlighted that Brexit has made us more vulnerable. She was quite right to highlight that. And I wonder if the UK is fit for the increased challenges to democracy, be they from the Russian Federation, Iran or China. And this is something that the Intelligence Committee had highlighted a number of years ago. I also note that a foreign oligarch had called for the unelected head of state to get rid of the democratically elected government using his own social media channel. But on a serious point, Madam Deputy Speaker, will ministers bring updated measures on how they see defending democracy in the UK, including the rights of those who are already here, but also in terms of protecting us all from outside interference?
I thank my honourable friend, and I won't be tempted to go down a particular track that he's tempting me to go down about oligarchs, etc. But what I would say is we live in a very uncertain time, and there is a sort of a safety first feeling that we would like to do in foreign policy, which is just to close everything down and just sort of to operate within the UK. But that's really not available to us. So what we seek to do is to bring ourselves in line with other interlocutors. I mean, the likes of Janet Yellen, for example, a very robust interlocutor, has visited Beijing on a number of occasions. We see the Australians, we see the Singaporeans, we see a number of others who do not have to leave their values at the door if they want to have a discussion about a particular economic opportunity, or if they're worried about something, they say it in an engagement. I can promise him there'll be no return to the golden era and a pint with Xi Jinping, but there will be a heightened awareness of our national security, and human rights will be paramount.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Chinese government.
Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If human rights are paramount, then why should we enable our trade balance to determine how we respond to abuses of human rights?
Very important question, and it is a sort of a three-stooled approach in good foreign policy. National security first, human rights our duty, but an eye to our economy, because I don't think any of us wants the continuing situation of our economy to be at the bottom of the league table, which is how it feels now.
Dr. Andrew Mirison.
Deputy Speaker, the malign extraterritorial reach of the Chinese Communist Party is being played out in very human terms, and I congratulate my right honourable friend for bringing an example of that to the floor of the House today. Why then is this government potentially facilitating that reach by handing over the Chagos Islands?
Madam Deputy Speaker, this urgent question is about Hong Kong, but I would just say that I think it's very important when international courts make decisions, be that the UNCLOS, be that other international courts and judgments, that we comply with them.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the national security law for Hong Kong is in direct conflict with Article 23 of the Basic Law for Hong Kong and a clear breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration?
We've been relentless on our pushing back on the erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong, and meeting civil society organisations when I was in Hong Kong in November, I reassured people there of the importance and the values of this House that we believe, and for those of us who have been around and were founding members of Hong Kong Watch, when the government Prime Minister of the time was having the pint with Xi Jinping, we will never turn away from underlining the importance of those fundamental rights and what Hong Kong has enjoyed in the past tense. And it is terribly sad to see the erosion of those rights. But we can't just give up and walk away. We have to have a dialogue, we have to keep pointing out our point of view, and we have to keep pushing back.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hong Konger residents I represent in Sutton Cheam are regularly in touch with me to outline their fears and uncertainty living under the threat of the transnational repression operated by China. The news that China is now issuing arrest warrants and bounties for the identification of pro-democracy campaigners in the UK is another step in that fear and that repression. And they often wonder, will they be next? Can I ask the Minister again, as has been done already, to make clear to China that these bounties are illegal, that any individuals who engage in the practice will be prosecuted, and more broadly, please start to stand up to China and their unacceptable persecution of British residents by applying legitimacy sanctions on the Hong Kong officials responsible.
Well, to take his question from the last bit forward, we will always maintain our flexibility on the Magnitsky sanctions. That's the benefit of them post-Brexit, that we have our own sanctions program now. And he will be aware, for example, of the important work that we're doing to sanction certain Chinese companies which are facilitating the Ukrainian conflict, for example, facilitating Russia in that particular theatre of war. And we will continue to look at where we can, within that regime, to ensure that we use any tools that we have to strengthen international processes and procedures and to stand up again and again for what is right in the international arena of human rights.
Jim Allister.